This is an Envoice Media podcast. You're listening to Criminal Code, our story behind bars.
How you guys doing? I'm Tony. I'm the host, actually, of Criminal Code. It's a podcast about, well, being in prison. Some of it's comical, some of it's serious. We're definitely here to discuss and answer questions that you may have in the future as well. Our last and first podcast was more about the funny things in prison, the residential drug abuse program, situations that we went through to hopefully reduce our sentence. And during this podcast, Sam here, who we both unfortunately spent time in prison. Now, the only fortunate thing is I got to meet him there. Other than that, everything else was pretty terrible. But we wanted to talk about the struggles, the anxieties of what happens when you're standing there in front of that judge and he tells you that you're going away for a while. Some of you watching may have served time. Maybe you got your sentence today, or maybe you're looking at serving a sentence. And depending on the prison that you're going to, it could be different. Fortunately for Sam and I, we were able to go to the lowest security prison. It's actually a minimum security prison it's called Morgantown in West Virginia. At prisons like this, it looks like a tennis camp. There's no fences, guards have no guns, etc. So that's what we wanted to go through in this podcast today.
Sounds good, Tony.
Perfect. I'll start with myself. It's probably the hardest thing that I ever had to do was when I was standing there in front of the judge. And long story short, I was convicted of securities fraud. And so I'm standing there in front of the judge. I know the prosecutors wanted to give me 5 years, but I ended up getting 24 months. And it's a long time for a guy like me or anyone when the judge tells you that you're going to prison. At first, when he said that number, my heart sank. It didn't make matters worse when my parents were sitting behind me and I could see my dad stone cold, and I could hear my mother crying. So when you commit a crime like I did, it just doesn't affect you. It affects your family members. What I didn't know moving forward after that day was the anxiety that's going to build up. And this is before you even check in. Myself and Sam, we had the I don't want to say the honor, but we had it easy in terms of self-surrendering. We weren't FBI didn't come to our homes. They didn't arrest us. They didn't put us in a detention center. We were able to, for the most part, plan things accordingly. Make sure our families are going to be okay. Make sure the financial house is in order. And then, we get dropped off at the prison system. But those are the things that you need to know if you're going to go to prison. Especially if you're able to self-surrender like we do. If you get arrested, FBI comes to your door and takes you away, there's not much you can do if you're in the county jail, if you're in the detention center, and nothing you can do. You can make a few phone calls and plan things, but the way that we were able to do it, and for the most part, probably about 25% of the prisoners that do go to prison, you're able to self-surrender. So it took me, I was free for another 3 or 4 months before I had to check in to Morgantown. And, during that time, aside from the sleepless nights, family not liking you, and I'm telling you, they're going to love you, but you're still going to be that guy going to prison. And it's not that they don't like you. It's going to take time because, there's embarrassments that come with going to prison and committing crimes, especially like I did. You carry a name, and things are going to happen in terms of you Your family's going to get embarrassed and so on and so forth. But it does get better. The thing is, it's going to get much worse before it gets better, So the up until that time, I got all my stuff in order. I knew my ex-wife at the time was going to be okay, and my family was going to be okay. I then flew from Los Angeles to Ohio to stay with my brother. And as I was with my brother for 2 or 3 days, he then dropped me off to Morgantown. Before I even got there, I didn't know what to expect. All I saw was Orange is the New Black, blood in, blood out, and all these prison stories. I thought I was going to go there and probably get my ass kicked for the first few days. But when I got dropped off, I was like, "Whoa, man! Look at this place. It looks like a middle school. Looked like the tennis camp that my parents took me to when I was a young kid. No fences, nothing." So I was okay for a second, and I'm like, well, what's going to happen? So I gave my brother a hug. That was hard, actually. Even seeing him cry. I only seen him cry 2 times in my life, and that was one of them. But when he dropped me off and I started, walking to the gate, I checked in, reality set in pretty quick. It's nothing like when you walk in and you see 3 correction officers. We're going to call them COs. There's nothing like seeing the 3 of them standing there, and then when you walk in, all you do is you hear the door shut behind you. Next thing they know, after they take your height, your weight, get all your measurements, and once they say strip and bend over, that's when reality kicks in. That's when freedom's out the door. It's gone.
What kind of anxiety did you feel? Because we're talking about anxiety, right? Mm-hmm. And so just want to talk about, because I know I went through anxiety prior to even getting into sentencing, and not really knowing what was happening, because my case was a little different than your case. And I felt like for me, I was I was falsely accused of what I did.
Oh, yeah, you're
and so for me, I was like, man, I'm going through this process, and I'm feeling anxiety because I'm I would never in a million years ever thought I would be in prison. So from the time that I got indicted in 2015 to 2017 of when I got November of 2017, I had major anxiety trying to figure out what was happening in my life, right? So it was I felt like my life was crashing down, and I think I mentioned before, I felt suicidal, and I was like, dude, I never experienced so much tension and stress in my life, and then taking it into my family and the kids and the wife and even my parents. And I was like, man, why am I going through this thing? And so mentally my head was in a weird spot, right? Mm-hmm. And I didn't want like you were saying, you were taking care of your family, right? You want to take care of make sure everything's in order before you self-surrender. For me, I felt like that even prior to getting sentencing. I was like, man, I need to make sure my family's good and make sure everything's good, because I didn't even know how long I was gonna go for, right? So I thought, am I gonna go for 10 years? Am I going for 5 years? Am I going for 1 year? I didn't even know any of this stuff. And so even when I finally accepted and did the plea deal, which I really did not want to do that because I wanted to fight it, but can't win. So I was like, okay, I gotta go. And so when I got into the sentencing room, I got a sentencing date, I didn't even want my wife to be there, because for me, I was going through anxiety and stress, and I felt all the stuff that was going through my head and what I visioned through this whole court case. I didn't want my wife to be there and remember vividly what the judge was going to give me in sentencing, because I was like, well, hopefully it's temporary. I'm done quick and out, and I don't want any of my, family members, parents, or wife to be there to remember. It's almost traumatizing, right? To see your loved one. Like you said, your mom was crying, right?
Yeah, it was hard.
So I was like, I didn't want that to happen. So I ended up going with a friend, you know. So I was like, hey, Elisa, don't come to the sentencing. I'm gonna go with Danny. And so he was there. He remembered what happened, and I remember what happened. And I've had like nightmares about it. But the good thing about it at the time was that, see, like now, like my wife doesn't remember it because she was not even there, right? But the good thing now was like when I got there and they're like, well, I was going to sentence you to 48 months, but I'm going to give you 25 months. And I was like, whoa. Like first thing that came to my head was, oh crap, that's a long time.
Yeah.
But it's not 48 months.
Yeah, but
right?
mine wasn't 5 years, but no, you're right.
Yeah. And so it was kind of like a blessing. But then at the same time, I had anxiety, but I was like, I had this like weight lifted off my shoulders because I knew now that in 25 months, I was like going to be clear and free, right? Well, we're never clear and free, but at least I wasn't going to be in prison, right?
And that's the not knowing part is where the anxiety, kicks in. So initially when I got sentenced, not knowing before then how long it was going to be was a cause of anxiety. And then that anxiety goes away for a little bit, like you were saying, once the judge throws the number at you. And no matter what, I mean, any number he gives is going to be a long time, but at the end of the day, 25 months or 24 months is better than 48 months or
60 months.
60 months.
Yeah.
I couldn't even imagine what that would be like. So at least that anxiety went out the door. And then the anxiety kind of changes. When one anxiety leaves, not knowing, now the anxiety is like, oh man, what's prison going to be like?
Right. So it's a different set of anxieties.
Yeah,
right?
it's a new.
So how did you prepare yourself? Like being sentenced, and now you have a certain date that you're supposed to self-surrender. Like, how did you prepare yourself mentally and whatever else you did? Because I know, like, what I did was like, I was like, oh my gosh, I'm going to prison now. And for me, like, I ended up hiring a prison consultant.
Right.
I think we talked about that. But also, like you mentioned, like I started watching all these prison shows just to kind of see like, oh man, was it really like, is it really going to be like this or is it going to be like that? Mm-hmm. And I was reading so much about, especially because I also was going to Morgantown in West Virginia. So then it was like one of those things where like I'm looking at everything, like what does it look like inside? What type of food do they have? What's their commissary list? Like I just like wanted to know so much about what was going on and what to expect for the next like however long I was going to be there. Right.
Yeah, no, and that's what I did because I still had another 3 or 4 months before I had to self surrender. So once the finance, I'm gonna call it the financial house, once that's in order, at least whatever the government didn't take from me, I knew at least my ex-wife at the time and my family were going to be somewhat okay. The rest of the time, I spent a lot of times on the computer just researching about minimum security camps and prison in general. My biggest fear was, am I going to get I'm going to lie, any type of violence.
Yeah.
Be it an ass whooping or sexual.
Right.
Nobody wants to go through that. That's the biggest thing, I was worried about because that's what we see in the movies.
Right.
Unless it was, say, Orange is the New Black, which is more of a low or a medium or something. The minimum, the camp life or club fed, whatever you want to call it, it's not glamorous, like the glamorous to a certain degree, like the scary prisons are in terms of watching it on TV. So I did a lot of research and reading on that, and that's when I stumbled upon the drug abuse program. Actually, it initially started when my attorney talked to me about possibly reducing the sentence because I had a lot of marijuana issues in my depositions, in my when you have that conversation with the probation office or something like that, and you tell about your story, a lot of marijuana issues there. So I did spend the last couple months really researching the residential drug abuse program to, well, I'm not going to lie, why I did it, make my sentence even less than even 24 months in the good time that you get, which was 15% or something like that. I don't know if it's changed now.
Yeah, and yeah, same thing. But like for me, I'm not gonna lie. Like I'm not gonna get into details, but I did experience some violence and things like that. So mine was a little bit different. I actually went into the shoe when I checked in. I had a few other altercations and situations when I first went in. And so like, and I didn't want to like tell anybody or tell my wife or anything like that. So like, I think like everyone's experience is a little different. Right. And so I even did get cut here from a blade, and I have a scar now here, and that's where I put the my tattoo, humility and gratitude on after the prison time, because could have been a lot worse. And you know, like prior to prison, I had a good life, and post prison, I'm living a good life. But like during the time we were in prison, I realized like, man, you learn about all these different people, like we talked about in the first episode. And like, as you get to know all these different types of lifestyle and people, like I am very thankful and blessed the type of life that I do live. And so I don't take, especially being in there for the time that we served, I don't take like one day for granted anymore. And like, that's why, like for me, it's like being like, I think being in prison like humbled me a lot, right? Like it's like, man, like everyone is people, like people are people. Like you shouldn't disrespect people. You shouldn't but like you need to help each other out if we can. Obviously there's assholes and jerks and whatever, but like generally speaking, like we want to be able to like help people out in circumstances and situations. But like, so like this tattoo, humility and gratitude is something that like really resonates with me in my life, because I'm thankful for every day that I have freedom and my health is there. Like lately my health is so, but like I'm getting better. And then also like the humility part, like, you know what, like no one is better than someone else. Like, right. So people are just like misguided. People are like not as smart, or maybe they don't have the opportunities, but like, I see it as like, okay, like let me help some other people if I can. Right? So that's why, you know, for me, that's important.
And going into the shoe, kind of weird because well, I went in, I had some alcohol on me, you know, advised by the RDAP, and not the RDAP, the RDAP counselors that said to go there at least drunk or with alcohol. But yeah, fortunately, I never made it into the shoe. Minus the peanut butter incident that we talked about last episode.
Wait, did you go into the shoe?
No,
you didn't. Okay.
Yeah, no. So for for me, the biggest thing I'll tell you was going to be and it changes after weeks when you're in there, but the biggest anxiety was going to be, you know, any type of violence. Yeah, I didn't experience the violence. Obviously, you know, experience other things. It's, you know, it's like an elementary school when you get in there, bunch of grown men. We were all little boys when they shut that door behind you. But, you know, when I checked into prison at the time, I was 222 pounds.
Right.
You know,
I remember Holly, was it his name? Yeah. I remember he checked in at the same time. And he was telling me, and this guy is like a small black dude. Like, probably like, I don't know, like 5'4", 5'5". He's, you know, and he was telling me, he was like, man, you don't even know, when he came in, we checked in together, this dude was so big. He's like, I was scared. I thought he was a sumo wrestler. So it was kind of funny. And he was like, yeah. And it's like, you know, us being Asians, you know, sometimes you might get like little intimidated by prison. If you know, like people 100%. Of color, people of like different things, because you and I both come from like white collar crime, right? So like, you know, when you're seeing prison, you're like, oh my God, you got these like big Doug looking guys, and we're just like very like,
and they're big boys there.
They're big boys.
They're coming from,
and some of them are scary looking, and like, you know, and you're
not us.
Yeah, and I'm like, okay, like I'm just like, and I was pretty heavy too because I was thrust eating. So like when you were how heavy were you?
222. 222.
So when I checked into prison, I think I was 205 or 210.
Yeah.
And so like
Oh, hey,
that
well
was like
before.
one of my heaviest times. But like, yeah, it was crazy. But like that stress also, like being in prison, like once you get in and the anxiety, like I was like, you know what? I don't want to eat. Like, so I think for the, like, and I had some issues that happened and I wasn't sure if I was getting into RDAP. I had a lot of things going through my head. I didn't know what you can say, what you can't say in phone calls or emails. Counselors weren't really too helpful with me. And so like, I think the first like 2-3 weeks, I literally like ate hardly anything. And like,
Yeah,
I think within the first 3 weeks, I went from like 205 to like 165.
right.
Like I lost almost like 50 pounds.
Because you don't. I mean,
Yeah.
you're not going to. The last thing you're thinking about is eating. Because I was the same.
And the food wasn't really that good. So it was always like, I was like, I'm okay with just.
It was terrible.
And they don't give you a lot. So like, even if you do eat, it's like very little. And for the first like I would say first 6 weeks, I bought stuff at the commissary, but like I didn't really even eat anything at the commissary. I had stuff just like I have it, but I was just so stressed. I just ate the meals, and the meals are literally like one little thing of eating, and it was like I ate like lunch and dinner. I didn't go to breakfast, and it was just literally like eating like maybe I had like 800 calories in a day. So for like 6 weeks eating 800 calories,
Oh, yeah,
I lost so much
you're
weight.
dropping
Yeah.
that water weight, and weight is gone.
Yeah.
And that's for myself, that first night, that was probably the hardest. That was the hardest night. I didn't want to go to sleep. Couldn't go to sleep. I was afraid to go to sleep. What if something happens?
Exactly.
Shit on my pillow.
Yeah.
5 guys come
Or
up to your
someone
bunk and you're done.
jump you, yeah.
Those are the fears and the anxiety that you have, that unless you were in there, you don't understand that level of fear. Not only is your freedom gone, but your freedom from having any type of violence like that, I guess I'm going to say bestowed upon you. That was probably the scariest night. And sooner or later, though, from all the stress, I got tired, I slept. And fortunately, the next day when I woke up, I was like, okay, well, number one, at least the nightmare continues. But two, I made it through that first night. No one even really bothered me. I kind of kept to myself. And aside from meeting some people, I just stayed to myself. And, once I saw that after the second night and then the third night, the fourth night, once I saw that what I was initially scared about, any type of violence or whatever, wasn't happening. Maybe name calling, newbie, fat Asian dude, whatever that stuff I don't care about. But once I noticed my biggest anxiety was the violence. Once that I saw that wasn't happening, maybe not going to happen, but that's not the type of place that I was at, I started to calm down a little bit. I was like, okay, I'm not going to get my ass kicked. There is no rape at a prison, like this. The most I'm going to deal with is the name calling and maybe breaking one of the unwritten rules, whether it's in the cafeteria, or whether it's at the gym or anything like that. The unofficial written rules that you got to abide by and stuff I got to learn. But as long as I knew that nothing was going to happen to me from a physical standpoint, my anxiety just started to dissipate there. And once that went, new anxieties come.
Different anxieties.
Yeah, now it's like, man, I got to be here another 24 months. How do I get into RDAP? Remember that?
Yeah.
Hoping you can get in.
But even like when you're in prison, I just remember like the first 5 days was the longest time. It just went by so slow.
I hated it.
And you just want to sleep because you're like, but then you can't sleep because like the lights are all over.
And you get woken up.
You get woken up. And then you got, what do they call like, oh shoot, like where count time. They have count. And so like we got to like wake up. And then
if you shake keys behind my head,
yeah,
right
you're
now.
like, oh yeah. It's crazy. And then you deal with like like I dealt with different anxiety, like you were talking about. Once you're there, it's like, oh, when do I get into RDAP? How do I get into RDAP? Like, am I gonna get into RDAP? And so like that's instead of going 25 months in prison, if you go into RDAP, then you end up going, you end up cutting a year off. So it ends up being 12 months actually in prison, right? So in my situation, it actually 10 and a half months, 11 months plus 6 months in the halfway house, and which is still prison, I guess, but you have a little bit more freedom.
The halfway house is another story.
Yeah, and that's a different anxiety.
Yeah, it's a different one.
But then when you get into prison and you get into RDAP, that's another anxiety that we had, right? Because now it's like you have to like act a certain way or they can kick you out. And so you're like worried about like not so like constantly, whether it's like peaceful or not, we just constantly dealt with like anxiety like all the time.
And it'll change. A new one always comes up. Like I say, once I knew, and once I got into RDAP and I was like, okay, I know how long I'm going to possibly be here. I know when I'm possibly going to go home. I say possibly because, it didn't happen like that for me because I got in trouble with the peanut butter. What I did realize once I started really doing my time, now you have your routine. Now there's no anxiety there. Your only anxiety once you get into RDAP is, all right, just follow the rules and try to lessen your time. The anxiety now is just making it through each day. But it wasn't as bad. My new anxiety up until the time I was released, realizing was that, man, my family's taking this harder than I am.
Right.
Think about it. Like when you got there and we were hanging out.
Well, and our homes and our families are in LA, and we're on the other side of the country too, right? So it's like extra, even to try to visit or even calling is like different time zones, and so like it's just kind of different way of life, and you just have to figure it out.
Yeah, much harder. Once you get situated and you realize, okay, I'm gonna be okay, and I'm just doing my thing. Yeah, it's much harder on the families than it is for us.
Right.
We just had to wait just to get out. I mean,
yeah.
Think about it. Sports, working out, softball, baseball, whatever you want. It's all, it's all there. It wasn't lockdown for us. Thank God we didn't have to go through, that experience.
We had a few times of lockdown, but not for a long time. Right?
Not like a COVID.
Yeah. No, not like that.
Oh, man. So, and those are the biggest, the issues in terms of when you're about to go to prison, when you're there afterwards, you realize, oh man.
So how did you deal with it? Like in prison and after prison, did you go through like therapy? Did you find God? Did you like, what was some of the ways that you were coping with things?
Honestly?
Yeah.
Aside from my family, man, found you.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I don't sugarcoat that with, anyone. Like I said, the only good thing about prison for me, aside from making me see things different in terms of how valuable my freedom is and being able to, be free, was, meeting with you. Because then my new anxiety, once I was like, okay, things are fine. I'm in RDAP. I know my family's having a hard time. I'm just going to try to lose my weight, get in shape and everything. My biggest anxiety was, man, what's life going to be like when I get out?
Right.
I'm a felon. Right. I wouldn't hire me.
Right.
It's
hard. That's what I'm saying. Life is never, once you get out, it's not easy again. It's not like,
man, it's a new anxiety because now there's always going to be, it's like having you'd rather have a 400 credit score, that's even possible, than have a felony on your record.
Yeah, it is.
That was my biggest, my biggest issue was what's life going to be like. I'm not the, nothing against flipping burgers and all that stuff. I'm not that guy that can just do. I was always an entrepreneur and everything like that. So yeah, once we started to become friends, and when you were like, hey, what are you doing when you're going out? Man, that was like probably 80% of my personal
Right.
anxiety. Like, holy shit, there's actually hope
Right.
when I got out. And then, when I finally got out and at the halfway house and stuff, and actually had our interview, remember? You had all the guys come out
Yeah.
to Morgantown to meet me. I had my brother.
Right.
Come.
Right.
He didn't even know what was going on. I was like, hey, I need you to
Right.
come here this weekend.
Yeah.
I met Danny and Spike and everybody. Yeah, that was my turning point. Now it was just a matter of not getting in trouble again, getting out and making my time better. So, that was probably the biggest pivot in my life. And that's why, like, at the end of the day, would I go through it again? And do I regret it? I regret, because I was guilty. I regret that. I don't want to do it again, but, fortunately that one time during that journey, God had one bright spot. You're fucking sitting here.
Yeah. I mean, I appreciate it. I mean,
well, I don't tell you. I mean,
yeah,
I tell you
I
a lot,
appreciate
but
it,
sometimes
man.
I gotta just remind you in
Yeah.
terms of that. So
I think for me, it's like, I mean, I went through a lot of stuff like shit and through that process, and even in prison and after prison. So like, for me, what really helped me kind of process some of the things is like I actually started seeing a therapist. So like I was seeing a therapist every week once I got out, and I was like, it really helped me understand and dissect the things that happened in my life and during that time. So like it helped me be more stable mentally. So I would strongly encourage people who are in prison or out of prison to really seek therapy. But I think through that process, because I've been seeing this for like 3-4 years or longer. So like I think even people who are not in prison should see therapists, just kind of like help you process things, and they teach you like how to breathe, and they go through breathing exercises and anxiety exercises, and like just coping with life stresses that happen. Like it's kind of a good thing. Like I think like people are, especially guys, are like, oh, I don't need therapy. Like if whoever sees therapy, that means there's something wrong with you. But it's like, I'm like, no, it actually helped me understand and dissect a lot of that stuff. So like it helps. It still helps me to this day. Like if I'm stressed over certain things, like I go through these different exercises in my head to like make sure. And then obviously like, and I'm a man of faith, and like, and even that during that process, that time, like, like I learned a lot of different like things about my faith. Like not religious. I'm not religious, but I have faith and I believe in God, and like, and like, it's not just like a thing where you go to church and be religious and be whatever, but it's more of like, hey, like God helped me like understand a lot of different things and help me understand and process the things that I went through. So, even the things of like me not feeling guilty and taking the risk of going to trial and going to prison for 10 years versus, okay, I'll swallow my pride and just go, and like didn't know how long it was going to be.
big swallow.
So from 48 months to 25 months, then down to 11 months and 6 months in halfway house, which is like basically 18 months. I was like, man, this is like a huge difference, right? And so like that was huge for me.
And then now, was it 5 years?
It's been 5
years later for the both
45
of us?
years.
Yeah.
I'm hitting my 5th year May 24th.
And then mine would be almost 6 in terms of being out.
Yeah.
You look back and it's like, man, number one, time goes fast. Number two, there's always anxieties. Yeah.
I still have anxiety.
Oh man, I do, but I'm definitely different now. Going through all that, then
That's good.
Yeah, I'm not much of a risk taker, a little more conservative, but definitely an experience that, well, when you do stuff like I did, you got to go through it and shape better, and the whole goal is not to go back.
I agree. And That's why even in business today, since I've experienced all this, I'm like, I am super compliant with everything that we do. I don't try to cut corners. There's no gray area. It's like, what does the law say about this?
Right.
And like, I'm just like super compliant in anything that we do. And like, it's funny because when I see like other competitors of what I do and they haven't been in prison or got in trouble with the law yet, they're like super, super liberal about like, cutting corners and like kind of doing things illegally, like super non-compliant. And the business that we're in is kind of in the legals field. And I'm like, man, they're jeopardizing their clients, in what they're doing and not realizing. And they're like super optimistic about like not being caught. I'm like, oh, I don't want to ever be in that situation. So for me, I'm like super cautious with everything that we do in the businesses that I'm involved with. So like, I just want to make sure. And so like, but life is tough with a felony. So like, it's like you said, like banks, credits, like businesses, loans,
And having to explain
your situation, and people thinking like, oh, you're a criminal. I'm like, yeah, in paper, but I didn't do it. But like
and not just in business, but
everything,
relationships,
with friends and family and just everybody. Just like you're like, oh, they kind of judge you a certain way. So, but anyways, I think that this was a very constructive conversation and podcast about anxiety and being a felon and pre and post and during prison time, and appreciate this time, and looking forward to next episodes of other things that happen, and hopefully the listeners can like take this and learn from it and like have questions, and maybe like they feel a little bit more hopeful if they're in the situation that we were in before. And that's what this podcast is about.
Yeah. Thank you for tuning in to Criminal Code. Definitely send us in any questions if you do have it, and we can have episodes about that, and we'll continue to create more of these to make sure that your anxieties and your questions are answered. So thank you for tuning in, and always a pleasure, Sam, talking with you about that experience of ours. So
sure.
Thank you again, everyone. Have a good day.
This was an Envoice Media production. Thank you for listening.